You there, guardsman! Do you like multi-part plastic sci-fi infantry that doesn't cost a kidney? Well, good news! The Mordian Glory channel is now officially sponsored by Wargames Atlantic. Wargames Atlantic sells fantastic sci-fi models which are perfect as alternative Imperial guardsmen. This includes the Bulldogs, totally not Praetorians, or the Legrognards, which are totally not Mordians, Praetorians, or Kriegers, all in one box. And the best bit is, Wargames Atlantic offers a bulk buy discount, and the more you buy, the bigger the discount. Perfect for amassing those huge platoons of guardsmen. So what are you waiting, you fool? Click on the affiliate link down below, get yourself some great models, and support the channel today.
Hello again and welcome to another Mordian Glory video. In today's episode, we are going to be looking at the army rules for the Imperilais Militia in Horus Heresy 2.0. And let me tell you, as a Warhammer 40k player who loves the Imperial Guard, the moment that I saw these Imperialis Militia army rules, I fell in love with them. They are so terrible. I have never seen an army which actively debuffs its units so much, and yet they are so flavorful. These rules truly convey what it would be like to be a regular human in a galaxy of space marines, demigods, and demons. But you know what? It's not all doom and gloom. And in amongst what seems like a bunch of army rules that actively hate their own faction, there are some hidden gems that a clever player can exploit to actually gain an advantage on the battlefield. Rules that have nuance, that have advantages and disadvantages, pros and cons, trade-offs and benefits. This is something I gotta see. And so without further ado, let's fix bayonets and charge right into this thing. First things first, before we even get to the rules surrounding the militia themselves and how they're going to impact you if you're building them as a standalone army, there is this guide regarding how the militia works as allies in the Age of Darkness chart. And I think this really clearly shows how the Imperilais militia can not only be used as a standalone force, but they're also very much designed and intended to be used as an allied force for pretty much any of the Astartes armies out there. Because you could have militia that fight alongside heretics, and you can have militia that fight alongside loyalists. And there truly are a lot of advantages, both tactically and thematically, for including some militia alongside your marines. I mean, off the top of my head, I can come up with a couple of ways how you could justify militia and Astartes fighting side by side, and it would look really cool on the battlefield. Perhaps you are collecting traitors and you're just pushing out these expendable human waves, just trying to use them to absorb casualties whilst your true warriors, your marines, your Astartes, advance behind them, always using them as like a human shield. Or maybe you are the loyalists and you're trying to protect the regular humans. Maybe you're Raven Guard and you've got some of these regular soldiers that are fighting alongside you, shoulder to shoulder with their transhuman cousins. Maybe there's a bit of a camaraderie going on, a bit of a brotherhood. There's a bit of backstory how your Raven Guard actually have some respect for the regular humans that they're fighting alongside because they've kind of proven themselves. Militia can be used in many different ways to tell a story. And from a tactical point of view, militia can be a great way of getting efficiency into your force. Not every job on the battlefield requires an Astarte to do it. You can have that militia squad do a relatively mundane task. Maybe it's cover a flank, maybe it's hold an objective. You can have some militia do that for way, way less than asking an elite marine unit to do it. That covers the advantages and disadvantages of allies from a high level, but let's just take a moment now to go through what the wording of the rule is. When determining allies, detachments selected from the Imperialis Militia Army list use the Imperial Army line on the allies in the Age of Darkness chart. However, detachments with the kinfolk Helens Abhuman Muster or Ogun Conscripts provenances must instead be classed as distrusted allies by all Space Marine Legion detachments and Solar Auxiliary detachments, regardless of faction. Quick side note here, if you're not sure what Kinfolk Helots, Abhuman Muster, Ogun Conscripts or provenances are, these are essentially your rights of war as a militia player. They're very varied, they're very cool, they're very flavorful, and I will be covering those in a separate video. Detachments selected from the Legio Custodes army must class all detachments selected from the Imperilais militia army list as by the Emperor's command instead. Now, if you're like me and you're a 40k player who started to get a bit interested in Horus Heresy, you might not be sure exactly how allies work. Essentially, you've got your main Crusade Force organization chart. This is your primary detachment. This is where the majority of your models are going to be. But you can include an allied detachment in addition. And the allied detachment is a bit smaller. You don't have as many slots, but it does allow you to take forces from another faction and include it in your army. Now, not all allies are equal, and there are 4 different layers of alliance. You have got at the top Swarm Brothers, underneath that you've got Fellow Warriors, underneath that you've got Distrusted Allies, and then finally you've got by the Emperor's command, or if you're on the traitor side, by the War Master's command. Typically, Imperial Army, and by extension Imperilais Militia, are either Fellow Warriors or Swarm Brothers, which is really good. It essentially means these units are part of your main force, and they get on really, really well. The problem is when you go to Distrusted Allies. It's a really, really big debuff, and to me it kind of defeats the point of taking Imperilais Militia from a tactical point of view, because it means that your allied units cannot score. So, as we said before, not every job needs an Astartes. You can hold an objective with a cheap militia squad, as well as you can hold an objective with an Astartes unit. If you are distrusted allies, you can't hold that objective. You can't count scoring. So, Kinfolk Helots, Abhuman Muster, and Ogun Conscripts are provenances that I would only really consider if you are going for a standalone army, or you really want to embrace some kind of thematic list or story scenario that you are playing. And as for the whole idea of Legio Custodes making Imperilais Militia by the Emperor's command, for me that basically means don't run Custodes and Militia side by side. Because not only can you never score as allied militia for Custodes, but also the 2 forces are dealt with as just as allies, but in addition, wherever a unit is within 6 inches of a unit that's part of a faction that falls under this level of alliance, then both units reduce their leadership by 1 until they are no longer within 6 inches of each other. So not only can you not score, but the Custodes and the Militia will be -1 leadership. Now, Custodes could probably handle being -1 leadership. Militia definitely can't handle being -1 leadership. They're already terrible leadership. So unless you are really, really, really going for a very specific story, Militia and Custodes should not be side by side. But that's enough about allies. Now let's get into the specific army rules for the Imperialis Militia. And these are going to affect you whether you're allied or standalone. And I'm not going to lie to you, at first they're going to look really bad. And you would be right. So first up, we have the militia unit subtype. With limited military training or experience, few militia forces were truly prepared for the horrors of the Horus Heresy. Those units committed to the war for the Imperium would be forced to rely on sheer numbers to carry the day, sending wave after wave of ill-prepared and under-equipped warriors to their deaths in order to hold back the foe. The following rules apply to all models with the militia subtype. A unit that includes any models with the militia subtype may only attempt to regroup if that unit includes at least half of the models that it included at the beginning of the battle, not including any models that have joined the unit during play. If more than half of its models have been removed as casualties, then it may not regroup and must continue to fall back until it leaves play. So if you take 50% casualties, and that causes your unit to break and start fleeing, they're just going to keep on going. They're just going to keep on fleeing. Wow. That is a big debuff. There's nothing you can do about it. If you're below half strength, you ain't coming back. But wait, it gets worse. A unit that includes any models with the militia subtype that is falling back and is successfully charged by an enemy unit is automatically removed from play as a casualty, with no leadership test being made or dice rolled. So to be clear here, this isn't just when you're below half strength. This is if you are fleeing. If you've taken a panic test and you are fleeing, and then someone charges you, and they make a successful charge, they have to make contact. It isn't just initiate the charge and then it goes to pot. They have to initiate the charge and then make a successful charge. If they do that, everyone in your squad dies, if you were fleeing. So you could have a big blob of militia levy, take a few casualties, have a panic test, fall back, and then they can just charge in, finish you off, and the whole thing just disappears. Now, it's these two rules combined basically mean try your very best not to flee. Unfortunately, with the low leadership of militia, that is easier said than done. Finally, a unit that includes any models that have the militia subtype, but not the monstrous or mechanized unit subtype. So there is a little bit of leeway here, a bit of a silver lining, that is locked in combat and then successfully is charged by an additional enemy unit, must make an immediate morale check once the charge has been resolved and as part of the charge subphase. If this check is failed, then the militia unit must fall back as if it had lost combat, with any enemy units are able to declare sweeping advances only if they are not locked in combat with any other units. Once this fall back and any sweeping advances are resolved, the fight subphase continues as normal. So essentially, if your militia unit gets charged by one enemy unit, that's fine. You can handle that. Probably. At least the fight you might not be able to handle the fight, but at least you'll stick around to see how badly you get beaten up. But if you get charged by two enemy units, so they charge one, and then they go to the next unit and do that charge, 2 units hit your militia squad, you have to take a morale test. And obviously, if you fail the morale test, you could just get completely swept up. Essentially, all of these militia unit subtype rules are there to represent that you are not an Astartes with superhuman training, with superhuman conditioning to be able to survive the horrors of war. You are a regular bloke. You are a regular person. And when the going gets tough, you are very likely to go, I'm not paid enough for this, and just get out of there. If you're a more competitively minded person, then these militia rules are going to feel very uncomfortable. But you have to remember that this is Flavour. The militia are not necessarily designed to be a force that you're going to win many games with. The purpose of these rules is to convey how hard, how truly difficult it would be to be a regular person fighting in the Horus Heresy, and how terrifying some of these battles would be. However, there is an upshot to these rules. It's not all bad, but the benefit of these rules isn't really displayed in this part of the army. It's displayed in your unit's points costs. And an extreme example of this is the iconic, the infamous Imperilais Militia Levy Squad, which allow you to get 20 soldiers for 40 points. And you can add an additional 30 levies to the unit for 2 points each, meaning you can get 50 bodies on the board for only 100 points. On top of this, they have strength in numbers, where you can select up to 3 of these squads to fill a single troop choice. These are numbers that only Astartes units can dream of. You can get 5 levies for every tactical marine. Those levies are terrible, but they are numerous. And quantity has a quality of its own. And the only reason why these guys are so cheap is because they have things like the militia unit sub. subtype. But this trend of having debuffing army rules but points breaks isn't just for your infantry. It extends into your tanks as well, with the third line unit subtype. Those militia forces that could field heavy armor in any quantity may do with older designs and marks that were no longer in active service, or with cast off or damaged units no longer fit for frontline combat. The only consolation for such commanders was that the arsenals of many worlds held large numbers of forgotten war machines left to moulder and rust as war raged across the Imperium. The following rules apply to all models with the militia subtype. When an armor penetration roll would inflict a glancing hit on a model with this unit subtype, instead it inflicts a penetrating hit. Oh my god. Vehicles are already considered to be extremely fragile in Heresy 2.0. Making it so every glancing hit becomes a penetrating hit just means that these things are going to be popping left, right, and center. If you're a 40k player who's looking in at this maybe a bit Heresy curious, you might not fully appreciate the big difference between a glancing hit and a penetrating hit. Now, I won't go into the mechanics of how you get a glancing hit versus how you get a penetrating hit. That's a whole conversation on its own. But instead, I'll tell you sort of the different impact it can have on a vehicle. So a glancing hit essentially just takes one wound off. A wound on a vehicle is known as a hull point in Heresy, but it's essentially a wound. Most vehicles have 3 hull points, but bigger ones can have 4 or even 5 hull points. But a penetrating hit not only takes off a wound, but also you get to roll on the vehicle damage chart. And this has the potential to destroy your vehicle in one go. Of course, it depends on the weapon. There are other factors. But rather than it taking 4 successful glancing hits to maybe grind and glance your Leman Russ to death, what could happen is your opponent gets to roll on the penetrating hit table and they just blow your Russ up in one go. So going onto the penetrating hit table and every glance counting as a penetrating hit really does make your vehicles likely to be popping. And even if you don't have your vehicle outright blown up, you could just have it severely debilitated. It could become immobilized and you can have weapons that are blown off. But like with the militia unit subtype rule, there are some advantages to being third line, which are both very flavorful and give some tactical benefits. The first advantage is your vehicles tend to be a bit cheaper. For example, an Imperilais militia Leman Russ comes in at the low price of 120 points. For the same vehicle in the Solar Auxilia, you would be looking at a strike tank, and that would be 150 points. If you were to take a militia Leman Russ with a demolisher cannon, that would come in at 140 points. In the Solar Auxilia, for your first Solar Auxilia Assault Leman Russ, which also comes with a demolisher cannon, it would cost you 200 points. So you get a significant discount for taking militia vehicles, but you also take a significant risk with militia vehicles. The other advantage, and this is a big one, is an enemy player may never score victory points for the destruction of a model with this unit subtype. This includes models with this unit subtype that are selected as Lords of War. If you are playing a kill point mission, this is actually broken, because your opponent could wipe out loads of tanks, and also some of your militia infantry get a rule similar to this baked into their unit entry. I've had a game where my opponent wiped out over 200 infantry and half a dozen vehicles and didn't score any victory points for it. And the really big one is, even if you're not playing in a kill point mission, because this also affects your Lord of War, the Militia Baneblade is unironically one of the best super heavies in the game. Because normally at the end of each mission, your opponent will get bonus victory points if they've killed a Lord of War. But if you lose your Militia Baneblade, your opponent can't score any victory points for that. And I have genuinely had it in one of my early games, my first ever game of playing Horus Heresy 2.0. My opponent, we thought they'd won the game or they'd been able to get the draw for the game for killing my Baneblade. And then we realized that afterwards, no, they don't get points for that. And it was actually the Militia that had managed to win the game. So as crazy as it sounds, third line can be a genuinely game-winning ability for you as the Militia player. But not only can this be a bit of a tactical advantage, it also thematically feels right for this army. The flavor is being layered on again and again. Because in a galaxy of Marines, how valuable is a regular human? Not at all. They're very, very expendable. And the whole theme of Imperilais Militia is that you only really win through sheer numbers. And you are going to take heavy casualties. But if you can make those Astartes, whether they're loyalist or traitor, pay for every inch of ground, and you really get into the idea, into the mindset of the army. And in a galaxy where everyone is superhuman, being the underdog is actually quite unique and quite interesting. But putting the theme aside for one moment, I think it also shows a great intelligence behind the rules. Thought and care was put behind the rules. Because if the Militia didn't have this rule, then they would have no chance in several missions. They'd have no chance in any kind of kill point mission. Because their stuff would just die so easily. It'd be a foregone conclusion. The whole thing is you have to take wave after wave of men. You have to take tank after tank after tank. You can't have situations where you have to take a horde army and then you're actively punished for doing that. That just feels badsies. I have been in those scenarios before in older editions of Warhammer 40k, in 6th and 7th edition, where there was no concession to being a guard player and being a horde player. There was no attention to detail. There was no thought put into it. And so seeing something like this to me is a really good sign that these rules were not necessarily thought out with balance, but were thought out with some degree of fairness in mind. But last, we have mechanized unit subtype. Some armored combat units lack the bulk of true combat vehicles and operate as light attack or scout platforms. These units mirror the agility of infantry units, but boast the endurance that only a machine can demonstrate. The following rules apply to all models with the mechanized unit subtype. Successful wounds caused by attacks with the poisoned X or fleshbane special rule must be rerolled against models with the mechanized unit subtype. Fail to wound rolls made for weapons with the Armbane X special rule and against a unit that includes any models with this unit subtype must be re-rolled. A model with the mechanized unit subtype may attack all weapons it has when making a shooting attack, including as part of a reaction. A model with a mechanized unit subtype may attack with heavy and ordnance weapons whilst counting as stationary, even as moved in the preceding movement phase, and may declare charges as normal regardless of any shooting attacks made in the same turn. A model with the mechanized unit subtype is affected by the Haywire, Detonation, and Battlesmith X special rules as if it had the Dreadnought unit type. No model that does not also have the mechanized unit subtype may join a unit that includes one or more models with the mechanized unit subtype. Now that might seem like a lot of special rules, and some of those actually seemed like positive ones. The reality of the situation is it's just an extra layer of rules for the Imperilais Militia Sentinel Squadron. Sentinels are walkers like dreadnoughts, but they're nowhere near as well armored. You've got to take into account that they've got an open canopy, so you can just see the dude. You got to think these aren't the Hermes Sentinels. These aren't the Atheron Sentinels of the Solar Auxilia. These are the essentially regular Sentinels that you find in your Imperial Guard 40k range that you're using in Imperialis Militia. So all of this mechanized stuff is just there to really add the flavor and to make sense of what it would be like to interact with the Sentinel. So poison and fleshbane is less likely to affect the Sentinel unless you can hit the pilot. So hence why you're still affected by poison, but you have to re-roll successful wounds. A Sentinel is a light vehicle, so if you fail to wound it with an armor bane thing, you should get a reroll because it'd be relatively easy to damage a Sentinel with an armor bane weapon. You have to take into account that Sentinels can move and shoot, and they can fire all their weapons because it's like a stable platform. A Sentinel running around firing a las cannon is totally okay. It's not going to need snapshots, unlike a dude running around trying to fire a las cannon from the hip. And then you've also got things here like you can repair them, and they would be affected by haywire and detonation and all that kind of stuff. And you can't have like an independent character like plodding along with the Sentinel squadron. So there's the reason why these are repeated here. When you see the mechanized rules, you might be like, oh, interesting. When you actually dive into it, it's just essentially a way of taking the infantry rules and adding a layer onto them to represent that Sentinels are somewhere between a true vehicle, a true tank, and an infantryman. So with all of that said, when it comes down to it, the two main army rules for the Militia are the Militia unit subtype and the third line unit subtype. Both of these have got active debuffs in them, but interestingly, they also have some fairly decent upsides as well. What I love about Horus Heresy rules, especially these ones for the Imperilais Militia, is not only do they get the theme right, not only do they pass the vibe check, not only do they make me immersed in my faction, I am getting a real sense of what it's like to be in the Imperilais Militia versus being in something like the Solar Auxilia, where all of my shit works and all of my troops are actually good. But in addition to that, I like the fact that there are trade-offs, that there are some negatives, but there are some positives. My dudes are dog shit, but they're cheap. My tanks are fragile, but they're cheap, and my opponent doesn't get the benefit of scoring with them. I find it, although a little silly, I find it funny in a good way that my Baneblade is actually one of the better Baneblades. Because if they lose a Baneblade for the Legions, or they lose a Baneblade for the Solar Auxilia, oh my god, that was actually one of the good ones. That was actually one of those ones that we'd like spent time like building and maintaining. Oh, that's a big deal. And then you get to the Militia, it's like, oh yeah, that's that old Baneblade that had all of its armor like completely wrecked off, and we just sort of shoved it in a storage yard until we could be bothered to fix it or get around to fixing it. Oh my god, what do you mean the Militia have welded corrugated iron over it and turned it into a turtle tank? What? Where did they find the shells for it? They made their own? Those are surely going to be much more liable to cook off. I just love that not only does it naturally start making stories and making memorable moments, but it also makes sense on the tabletop. Rules that are intuitive, rules that are immersive, are superior than rules that are abstract and are done for the sake of game mechanics, not for the sake of player enjoyment. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. What are your thoughts and feelings on these unit subtypes? And how do you find it affects you on the battlefield? If you enjoyed today's video, then don't forget to go ahead and smash that like button. It really does help, especially when we're covering a game like Heresy 2.0. to support this video, support the channel, and get it going in the old YouTube algorithm. And if you want to see more of this content, and you want to find out how the Militia provenances of war work, and what warlord traits they have, and how those massively influence your army, then make sure you subscribe to never miss an episode.
Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure, and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian Glory Hole, today is your lucky day.